My wife introduced me to her uncle, the son of a bank president. He and his parents made fun of me for being a high school graduate. When I said I would close my account, they laughed. But when I closed my $7 billion account, look, I'm gonna level with you right off the bat. I never gave two craps about playing those ridiculous status games that seem to consume half the people in this country. You know the ones I'm talking about, right? The whole, my car's bigger than yours, my job title sounds fancier, I went to Harvard so I'm automatically smarter, bullshit that makes cocktail parties feel like pissing contests. At 34, I had what most people would kill for, a solid marriage to Claire, a woman who could make me laugh until my sides hurt, and who looked absolutely stunning in everything from sweatpants to evening gowns. I was also the senior consultant for a logistics firm that I'd literally built from the ground up, starting with nothing but a beat-up laptop and more determination than sense. But here's the kicker, and this is where things get interesting. Most people had absolutely no clue about the real scope of what I'd accomplished. See, my background wasn't exactly what you'd call impressive on paper. I didn't graduate from some fancy Ivy League school with a degree in business administration and a minor in how to be pretentious. Hell, I didn't graduate from any college at all. After high school, while my classmates were busy taking out massive student loans to study subjects they'd never use in the real world, I jumped straight into the workforce at 18. Call me crazy, but I figured learning by doing beat learning by theory any day of the week. But here's the thing that nobody seemed to understand. I had this weird gift for three things that actually matter in business: numbers, systems, and people. Numbers don't lie to you like people sometimes do. Systems either work or they don't. There's no middle ground to hide mediocrity in. And people? Well, once you figure out what makes them tick, you can build something incredible together. Over the years, I'd taken that knack and turned it into something most people only dream about, through smart investments. And I'm talking the kind of calculated risks that would make a Vegas dealer nervous. I'd build up what most folks would consider a small fortune. But that wasn't even the half of it. Eventually, I became the silent owner of multiple international ventures. We're talking businesses spanning 3 continents, dealing in everything from shipping logistics to tech startups to real estate developments that were reshaping city skylines. The funny part? I still live like a regular guy. Give me a pair of old jeans and a comfortable t-shirt over some stuffy 3-piece suit any day. I drove a reliable car that got me from point A to point B without breaking down, not some flashy sports car that screamed, "Look at me, I'm compensating for something." My house was nice, but not ostentatious. Comfortable furniture, a good kitchen where Claire could work her culinary magic, and a home office where I could run my empire in peace. Most people, and I'm talking even my own family here, looked at me and saw just another average working stiff. They'd see me at family barbecues wearing the same casual clothes I'd had for years, talking about normal stuff like sports and weather, and they'd mentally file me away as Claire's husband who works in logistics. Which, technically speaking, was true. I just happened to own the logistics companies too. Even Claire, bless her heart, knew I had money. She wasn't stupid, and she could see that we lived comfortably, that I never stressed about bills, and that I could afford nice things when we wanted them. But she didn't know the full picture. She knew I was successful, but she didn't know I was, by a small country, successful. And honestly, I thought that was perfectly fine. There's something to be said for flying under the radar. When people don't know you're wealthy, they treat you like a human being instead of like a walking ATM or networking opportunity. Conversations are genuine instead of calculated. People invite you to things because they actually like your company, not because they want something from you. It was a simple life, and I was content with it. Looking back now, with all the hindsight that comes from watching your world implode in spectacular fashion, I realize I was naive to think I could keep that balance forever. The thing about money, especially the kind of serious money I'd accumulated, is that it has a way of making itself known eventually. It's like trying to hide an elephant in your living room by throwing a bedsheet over it. Eventually, someone's going to notice the giant elephant-shaped lump taking up half the space. But at the time, sitting in my comfortable little bubble of anonymity, I thought I had it all figured out. I was successful without the stress of everyone knowing about it. I was wealthy without the target on my back that usually comes with wealth. I had a wife who loved me for who I was, not what I could buy her. Life was good, simple, and uncomplicated. I should have known it was too good to last. I should have realized that Claire's family, with their old money roots and social climbing tendencies, would eventually want to pull me into their world of appearances and status games. And I definitely should have seen it coming when Claire started talking about introducing me to her uncle Leonard, the golden boy of the family banking dynasty. But hey, hindsight's 20/20ths, right? At the time, I was just a guy who'd worked hard, gotten lucky, and wanted to enjoy the fruits of his labor in peace. Little did I know that peace was about to become a very expensive luxury. So there I was, Thursday evening, sitting at our kitchen table demolishing what had to be the best lasagna this side of Little Italy. Claire had this incredible talent for taking simple ingredients and turning them into something that would make Gordon Ramsay weep tears of joy. I'm talking about the kind of comfort food that makes you forget all your problems and wonder why anyone ever invented restaurants in the first place. I was just reaching for my second helping. Okay, fine. It was my third. Don't judge me. When Claire dropped the bomb that would eventually blow up my nice, quiet life into a million pieces. Oh, by the way, she said, twirling her fork through her pasta like she was about to comment on the weather. My Uncle Leonard wants to meet you. She said it so casually, you'd think she was mentioning that the mailman had delivered a package or that we were running low on milk. I paused mid-bite, a forkful of cheesy goodness hovering somewhere between the plate and my mouth. Leonard? The banking guy. I knew exactly who she was talking about, of course. Leonard Morrison, the crown prince of the Morrison banking empire, son of Preston Morrison, who ran Summit Bank like it was his personal piggy bank. Claire had mentioned him before in passing. Usually when she was talking about family gatherings, I'd conveniently found excuses to miss. That's the one, Claire nodded, taking a sip of the wine I'd grabbed from our collection. Not gonna lie, I had pretty decent taste in wine for a guy who supposedly just worked in logistics. He's very well connected, you know. His father runs Summit Bank, and Leonard's being groomed to take over eventually. This could be really good for you, honey. Now, here's where I should probably mention something important about my relationship with Claire's family. They came from what people like to call old money. The kind of wealth that's been passed down through generations like a family heirloom, complete with all the pretentious attitudes and social expectations that come with it. They had trust funds, country club memberships, and the kind of family trees that genealogists get excited about. Meanwhile, I came from the kind of family where a fancy dinner meant we splurged on name-brand ketchup instead of the store brand. Good for me how exactly? I asked, genuinely curious about where this was heading. In my experience, when someone with old money wants to help someone without it, there's usually a catch somewhere in the fine print. Claire leaned forward with that enthusiastic expression she got when she thought she'd solved all my problems. Well, you know, networking. Leonard knows everyone in the financial world. He could introduce you to potential clients, maybe help you expand your consulting business. You're always talking about growing the company, right? The irony was so thick you could cut it with a butter knife. Here was my wife, bless her heart, thinking I needed help expanding a business empire that already spanned multiple continents. It was like someone offering to teach Michael Jordan how to play basketball or suggesting that Gordon Ramsay might benefit from a cooking class at the local community center. But how could I explain that without revealing the full extent of what I'd built? Claire knew I was successful. She could see that we lived comfortably, that I never stressed about money, that I could afford nice things when we wanted them. But she thought successful meant I made good money as a consultant, not that I could buy and sell most of the companies Leonard probably considered impressive. I don't really need connections, babe, I said carefully, trying to find the right balance between truth and discretion. The business is doing pretty well on its own. Claire waved her hand dismissively, like I was being modest for no reason. Oh, come on. Everyone can use good connections. Besides, Leonard's really curious about you. I've told him you're smart and hardworking, and he wants to meet the man who swept me off my feet. I had to bite back a laugh at that. If Leonard was anything like the typical banking heir I'd dealt with in my business ventures, he was probably curious about me the same way a cat is curious about a mouse, as something amusing to play with before moving on to more important matters. He's a bit blunt, Claire continued, using that tone people use when they're trying to warn you about someone without actually warning you. But don't take it personally. That's just how he is. Once you two start talking business, I'm sure he'll respect you. He respects success, and you're definitely successful. Again with the irony. If Leonard respected success, he was about to meet more of it than he could handle. But Claire didn't know that, and something told me this meeting was going to be a masterclass in assumptions and misconceptions. Besides, Claire added, warming to her subject, it'll be good for you to meet more people from my family. I know you've been avoiding some of the gatherings, but Leonard's different. He's accomplished something on his own merit, not just inherited everything. I almost choked on my wine at that one. From what I'd heard through Claire's family gossip network, Leonard's biggest accomplishment was being born with the right last name. Sure, he worked at the bank, but calling it his own merit was like saying a NASCAR driver built his own racetrack. When and where? I asked, figuring I might as well get this over with. Besides, there was a part of me, the part that had always enjoyed a good challenge, that was curious to see exactly how far up their own asses the Morrison family had their heads. This Saturday at Meridian. You know, that steakhouse downtown. Claire's face lit up like she'd just solved world hunger. Leonard's parents will be there too, Preston and Marjorie. It'll be perfect. Perfect. Right. Because nothing says perfect evening like dinner with people who judge your worth based on which university you didn't attend and which country club you don't belong to. Sounds great. I lied, already mentally preparing myself for what was sure to be an evening of barely concealed condescension and thinly veiled insults. Little did I know I was walking into what would become the most expensive dinner conversation in Summit Bank's 100-year history. Looking back now, I should have trusted my instincts and found an excuse to skip the whole thing. But sometimes life has a funny way of putting you exactly where you need to be, even when where you need to be is about to become a complete shit show. Saturday evening rolled around faster than a tax bill in April, and there I was, standing in front of my closet trying to figure out what the hell to wear to meet the royal banking family. Claire had been buzzing around the house all day like a caffeinated hummingbird, giving me helpful suggestions like, make sure you look presentable, and try to make a good impression. Because apparently, she thought I regularly showed up to important dinners looking like I'd just crawled out of a dumpster behind a 7-Eleven. I settled on my usual go-to for occasions when I needed to look like I gave a damn, but didn't want to look like I was trying too hard. Black shirt, dark blazer, and my most comfortable pair of dress pants. Nothing flashy, nothing that screamed, look at me, I'm important. Just clean and understated. In my world, if you had to advertise how successful you were through your clothes, you probably weren't as successful as you thought you were. The drive to Meridian was quiet except for Claire's nervous chatter about how excited she was for me to finally meet her uncle and his parents. She kept going on about how this was going to be so good for my career and how Leonard was really looking forward to talking business with me. I just nodded and made the appropriate sounds while mentally preparing myself for what I was pretty sure was going to be an exercise in patience. Meridian was exactly the kind of place you'd expect old money types to hang out. All dark wood paneling, dim lighting, and the kind of atmosphere that whispered, if you have to ask about the prices, you can't afford to eat here. The hostess, a blonde woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine about expensive things, greeted us with the kind of smile that was professionally warm but personally cold. We're meeting the Morrison party, Claire told her, and I swear the hostess's smile became about 20% more genuine. Money recognizes money, even when it's just the smell of it lingering in the air. She led us through the restaurant to a corner table where 3 people were already seated, and let me tell you, they looked exactly like Central Casting had ordered them for a movie about entitled rich people. There was Preston Morrison, probably in his early 60s, with silver hair that had been styled to within an inch of its life, and the kind of tan that comes from spending winters in places where the average person's annual salary wouldn't cover a week's vacation. Next to him sat Marjorie, his wife, who had that ageless quality that comes from having unlimited access to the best plastic surgeon's money can buy. Her jewelry alone probably cost more than most people's cars, and she wore it with the casual confidence of someone who'd never had to check her bank balance before making a purchase. And then there was Leonard. Oh, Leonard. The golden boy himself, probably around my age, but carrying himself like he'd been born wearing a crown. He had that particular brand of confidence that comes from never having been told no about anything important in your entire life. His suit probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, and he wore it like armor against the common folk. They all stood up as we approached, and I could practically feel the temperature drop as their eyes took in my appearance. It was like watching 3 people simultaneously realize they'd been expecting filet mignon and had been served a cheeseburger instead. Leonard, Mom, Dad. Claire said with obvious excitement. This is my husband, the one I've been telling you about. I extended my hand to Preston first, because that seemed like the polite thing to do. His handshake was firm but brief, the kind that said, I'm acknowledging your existence, but don't get too comfortable. Marjorie offered me a hand that felt like she was afraid I might contaminate her manicure, and Leonard's grip was the kind of aggressive squeeze that insecure men use to establish dominance. Please, sit down, Preston said, gesturing to the chairs across from them like he was granting me an audience. We hadn't even ordered drinks yet, and I could already tell this was going to be a long evening. The waiter appeared almost instantly. Apparently, when you're a Morrison, service happens at light speed. After we'd ordered drinks, they went for expensive wine while I stuck with a beer, because I'm a simple man with simple tastes. The interrogation began. So, Preston said, settling back in his chair with the air of a judge preparing to hear a case. Claire tells us you work in consulting. That's interesting. What exactly do you consult about? Logistics, mostly. I replied, taking a sip of my beer. Supply chain optimization, efficiency improvements, that sort of thing. Marjorie tilted her head like a confused bird. Oh, like shipping? The way she said shipping made it sound like I'd told her I made my living collecting garbage or cleaning sewers. There was this barely concealed distaste in her voice, like she couldn't quite believe her precious niece had married someone who dealt with such mundane, blue-collar concerns. Among other things, yeah, I said, keeping my tone even. It's actually more complex than most people realize. Global supply chains, international trade regulations, cross-border logistics coordination. Fascinating, Leonard interrupted, though his tone suggested he found it about as fascinating as watching paint dry. And where did you study this? What university? And there it was, the question I'd been waiting for. The academic credentials check that people like this always used as their first filter for whether someone was worth their time. I didn't go to college, I said simply. I went straight into business after high school. The silence that followed was so complete you could have heard a pin drop in the next county. All three of them just stared at me like I'd announced I was actually an alien from Mars who'd come to Earth to study human mating rituals. Preston recovered first, clearing his throat with the kind of diplomatic cough that probably served him well in board meetings. Well, that's quite entrepreneurial of you. The way he said entrepreneurial made it clear he meant stupid, but was too polite to say it directly. Marjorie's eyebrows had climbed so high they were practically hiding in her hairline, and Leonard was looking at me like I was a fascinating specimen he'd found under a microscope. The look they exchanged between the three of them was the kind of silent communication that only comes from years of shared snobbery. It was the look that said, "Oh honey, we were expecting someone impressive, and instead we got this." And that, ladies and gentlemen, was when I knew this evening was going to be absolutely fucking epic. What happened next was like watching a masterclass in passive-aggressive warfare, except instead of being the observer, I was the target sitting in the middle of the battlefield with a bullseye painted on my forehead. If you've ever wondered what it feels like to be slowly dissected by people who consider themselves your intellectual superiors, well, buckle up, Buttercup, because I'm about to give you a front-row seat to the show. Marjorie was the first to reload her weapon after that nuclear silence. She gave me what I can only describe as the kind of smile you'd give a toddler who just proudly announced they'd eaten their own boogers. "Oh, so you're self-taught," she said, her voice dripping with the kind of sympathy usually reserved for terminal cancer patients. "That's so very brave of you." Brave. Like I'd climbed Mount Everest in flip-flops instead of choosing to skip 4 years of overpriced education to start making actual money. The way she said it made it clear that in her world, self-taught was just a polite way of saying too poor and stupid for real school. Leonard, not to be outdone by his mother in the art of subtle insults, let out this little chuckle that sounded like a hyena choking on its own smugness. He turned to his father with the kind of theatrical gesture that belonged on a soap opera. "Uncle Preston, can you even imagine trying to run a major business with only a high school diploma? I mean, that's really quite rare these days, isn't it?" The emphasis he put on rare made it clear he meant impossible, but was trying to sound diplomatic about it. It was like listening to someone say, "Bless your heart," while simultaneously planning your funeral. Preston, who was clearly the master of this particular family sport, nodded sagely like Leonard had just made some profound observation about the nature of human intelligence. Indeed, Leonard, in today's complex business environment, one really needs a solid educational foundation. Harvard Business School teaches principles that simply can't be learned anywhere else. Ah yes, Harvard Business School. The magical place where they apparently teach you how to lose $7 billion without breaking a sweat. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Of course, Marjorie chimed in, apparently not content to let the men have all the fun. There's something quite refreshing about the old-fashioned approach. So authentic. She said authentic the way most people would say quaint or adorable. Like I was a cute little folk art project she'd discovered at a rural craft fair. Claire, bless her oblivious heart, was sitting there sipping her wine like this was perfectly normal dinner conversation. Every now and then she'd nod along like they were discussing the weather instead of systematically dismantling her husband's credibility one backhanded compliment at a time. You know, Leonard continued, warming to his subject like a stand-up comedian who'd found his rhythm. I have so much respect for people who make it work without the advantages of proper education. It must be incredibly challenging to compete in sophisticated markets when you're, what's the phrase, flying by the seat of your pants? Flying by the seat of my pants. Right. Because apparently turning a high school education into a multi-billion-dollar international business empire was just dumb luck and good timing. Like winning the lottery, except instead of buying one ticket, I'd somehow stumbled my way into owning the entire lottery system. Oh, absolutely. Marjorie agreed enthusiastically. It's so admirable when people make the best of their circumstances. I always tell my charity board that we shouldn't underestimate what people can accomplish even with limited opportunities. Limited opportunities. There it was, the real kicker. In their minds, I wasn't just uneducated. I was some kind of charity case who'd managed to scrape together a decent living despite my tragic lack of proper breeding and academic credentials. The waiter chose that moment to return for our dinner orders, and I swear he could sense the tension at the table. He kept glancing between us like he was watching a tennis match where one player was getting massacred but somehow kept getting back up for more punishment. After we'd ordered, and of course they all went for the most expensive items on the menu while making subtle comments about how I should try the business lunch special. It's quite reasonable. The conversation resumed with renewed vigor. You know what's really impressive though, Leonard said, leaning forward with fake enthusiasm, is that you've managed to keep Claire happy without being able to provide her with the lifestyle she grew up with. That takes real creativity. And there it was, the suggestion that I was some kind of financial burden on their precious princess. Never mind that Claire lived better with me than she ever had with her trust fund. Never mind that our house was nicer than anything she'd ever owned before. In their minds, if you didn't have the right pedigree, you couldn't possibly be providing adequately. Preston nodded approvingly at his son's observation. Yes, love conquers all, as they say. Claire's always been our little romantic, willing to overlook practical considerations for matters of the heart. Practical considerations, like the fact that I could buy and sell their entire social circle before lunch and still have enough left over to buy a small country for dessert. It's just so fortunate, Marjorie added with that same patronizing smile, that Claire has the family resources to fall back on if things get difficult. We always take care of our own, don't we, Preston? The implication was crystal clear. When this little experiment in marrying beneath her station inevitably failed, they'd be there to pick up the pieces and find Claire someone more suitable. But here's the thing about sitting there listening to people talk about you like you're some kind of financial deadbeat who got lucky. It gives you a lot of time to think. And what I was thinking, as I watched these three pompous assholes pat themselves on the back for their superior breeding and education, was how absolutely fucking hilarious this was going to be when the truth came out. They thought they were looking at a small-time consultant who'd married above his station. What they were actually looking at was someone who could end their family's banking dynasty with a phone call. But patience, I told myself. Let them have their fun. The night was still young, and the best was yet to come. By the time our overpriced steaks arrived, and let me tell you, for what they were charging, these cows should have been hand-massaged by Swedish supermodels and fed nothing but champagne and caviar. The conversation had settled into a rhythm that was as predictable as it was infuriating. The Morrison family had apparently decided that I was their evening's entertainment. and they were determined to squeeze every drop of amusement out of mocking the poor, uneducated peasant who'd somehow managed to trick their precious Claire into marriage. I was about halfway through my ribeye, which was admittedly pretty damn good despite the company, when Preston decided to launch into what was clearly one of his favorite topics: the illustrious history and supreme importance of Summit Bank. You know how some people collect stamps or vintage cars? Well, Preston collected opportunities to brag about his family's financial institution like it was the eighth wonder of the world. You know, he said, cutting into his steak with the precision of a surgeon, Summit Bank has been serving this community's most distinguished families for over a century now. We're not just a bank. We're a cornerstone of financial stability for people who understand the value of tradition and excellence. Leonard nodded along like his father was delivering the Gettysburg Address instead of a corporate sales pitch. That's right, Dad. We're very selective about our clientele. It's not about the size of the account. Well, not entirely. It's about maintaining relationships with families who share our values. I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing out loud at that one. Not entirely about the size of the account. Right. Because I'm sure they were turning away billionaires left and right because they didn't have the proper breeding credentials. Marjorie dabbed at her lips with her napkin like she was posing for a painting. Oh yes, we've had to turn away quite a few. Shall we say nouveau riches? People who think that just because they've made some money, they automatically deserve access to our services. The irony was so thick you could have served it as dessert. Here they were, talking about nouveau riches like it was some kind of disease, when in their minds I was apparently so far down the social ladder that I didn't even qualify for nouveau status. I was just poor riche, I guess. It's fascinating, really, Leonard continued, clearly enjoying himself, how some people think banking is just about deposits and withdrawals. They don't understand that what we provide is so much more than that. It's prestige, connections, access to opportunities that simply aren't available to everyone. Preston raised his wine glass like he was about to make a toast. Exactly, son. Summit Bank isn't just where you keep your money. It's a statement about who you are and what you've achieved in life. Now, I'd been sitting there for the better part of 2 hours, taking their shit with a smile and the patience of a saint. But something about that particular comment, the smugness, the self-importance, the complete dismissal of anyone who didn't meet their arbitrary standards, finally got under my skin. Funny you should mention that, I said, setting down my fork and leaning back in my chair. I've actually been thinking about moving my accounts elsewhere. The effect was immediate and hilarious. All three of them stopped mid-chew like I'd just announced I was planning to rob their precious bank instead of simply taking my business somewhere else. Preston's eyebrows shot up so fast I was worried they might achieve escape velocity. Oh, Marjorie said, trying to sound casual but failing spectacularly. And why is that? I shrugged, playing it off like it was no big deal. Just shopping around, you know? Seeing what other banks have to offer. Maybe finding somewhere that's a little more, how did you put it, welcoming to different types of clients. Leonard, who had been mid-sip of his wine, actually snorted. Not a polite little cough, but a full-on, liquid coming out of his nose snort. He quickly grabbed his napkin to clean up the mess, but not before giving me a look that was equal parts amusement and condescension. Oh, please, he said, once he'd recovered from his wine-snorting incident. Go ahead and move your account. I'm sure losing one regular checking account won't exactly make a dent in our books. Regular checking account. Oh, sweet, naive Leonard. If only you knew that my regular checking account contained enough money to buy your precious bank 3 times over and still have enough left for a nice vacation. Preston, apparently feeling left out of the fun, decided to pile on. Yes, Leonard's quite right. Summit doesn't depend on small-timers for our success. We deal in billions, not, well, whatever it is you're working with. Small-timers. Billions. The man was practically handing me comedy gold on a silver platter. Here I was, sitting across from the president of Summit Bank, while he bragged about dealing in billions and dismissed me as a small-timer. It was like watching someone brag about how tough they were while unknowingly picking a fight with a Navy SEAL. Billions, huh? I said, taking another sip of my beer. That's impressive. Oh yes, Marjorie chimed in, apparently not wanting to be left out of the family sport of financial dick measuring. Preston has grown Summit's assets under management to over $15 billion. We're one of the most successful regional banks in the country. 15 billion. I had to work very hard to keep my expression neutral at that number. See, here's the thing about my particular situation that made this moment so absolutely delicious. My primary account with Summit Bank, the one they were so casually dismissing as inconsequential, contains $7 billion in liquid assets. That's not counting my long-term holdings, my international investments, or the various other accounts I had scattered across different institutions. In other words, my single regular checking account represented nearly half of their entire bank's assets under management. But they didn't know that. In their minds, I was just some blue-collar guy with maybe a few $1,000s to my name. Leonard leaned forward with that same smug expression he'd been wearing all evening. You know what? I'm actually curious now. What exactly would it take to keep your business? Are we talking about waiving a monthly fee? Throwing in some free checks? The condescension in his voice was so thick you could have spread it on toast. Free checks. The man was offering me free fucking checks like I was some kind of charity case. I smiled back at him, and for the first time that evening, it was a completely genuine smile. Oh, don't worry about it. I'm sure you're right. Losing my account probably won't even register on your radar. And that, my friends, was the moment when I decided that Preston Morrison and his arrogant family were about to learn a very expensive lesson about making assumptions. The ride home from Meridian was quieter than a funeral procession, except instead of mourning someone's death, I was quietly planning the financial assassination of an entire banking dynasty. Claire sat in the passenger seat, humming some tune she'd heard on the radio earlier, completely oblivious to the fact that her husband had just been declared war on by her own family. And that said husband was about to return fire with the economic equivalent of a nuclear weapon. Well, that went well, Claire said cheerfully as we pulled into our driveway. She had this amazing ability to rewrite history in real time, turning what had clearly been a disaster into some kind of social victory. I think they really liked you once they got to know you. I stared at her for a moment, wondering if we'd attended the same dinner or if she'd somehow been transported to an alternate dimension where her family hadn't spent the entire evening treating me like something they'd scraped off their shoe. Really? That's your takeaway from tonight? Oh, come on, she said, waving her hand dismissively as we walked toward the front door. You know how they are. They're just particular about people. But once you prove yourself, they'll come around. Prove myself. Right. Because apparently building a multi-billion-dollar business empire from scratch wasn't proof enough of anything except my lack of proper breeding credentials. I unlocked the front door and we stepped inside, Claire immediately kicking off her heels and sighing with relief. My feet are killing me. Those shoes look amazing, but they're torture devices in disguise. Claire, I said, following her into the living room. We need to talk about what happened tonight. She turned around with that slightly exasperated expression she got when she thought I was being overly dramatic about something. What about it? Look, I know they can be a little intense sometimes, but that's just their way. They don't mean anything by it. They called me uneducated trash, Claire, for 2 straight hours. They did not, she protested, though her voice had that slight uncertainty that meant she knew damn well they had. They were just curious about your background. There's nothing wrong with that. Curious? I couldn't help but laugh at that one. Your uncle offered me free checks like I was some kind of charity case. Your aunt talked about me like I was a fascinating specimen from the wrong side of the tracks. And your cousin acted like my very existence was an insult to his precious bank. Claire flopped down on the couch and gave me the kind of look you'd give a child who was throwing a tantrum over something trivial. You're being way too sensitive about this. So what if they asked about your education? So what if they made a few jokes? That's just how wealthy families operate. They test people. It's not personal. Not personal. Jesus Christ, if that wasn't personal, I'd hate to see what they considered a direct attack. They suggested you were slumming it by marrying me, I pointed out. They implied that your family would need to support us financially when my little business inevitably fails. How exactly is that not personal? Oh, please, Claire said, rolling her eyes in a way that made me want to scream. They were just teasing. You need to learn to take a joke. Besides, it's not like you don't make jokes about other people. And there it was, the moment I realized that my wife, the woman I'd thought knew me better than anyone else in the world, had absolutely no clue who she'd actually married. She saw the teasing, the condescension, the barely veiled insults. and her response was that I should just suck it up and take it like a good little peasant. Right? I said slowly, taking a joke. Got it. I walked over to the bar cart in the corner of our living room and poured myself a generous glass of whiskey. Not because I needed liquid courage for what I was about to do, but because some moments in life require the proper ceremonial accompaniment, and this was definitely one of them. Look, Claire said, her tone softening like she thought she could smooth this over with a little sympathy. I know tonight was probably overwhelming. My family can be a lot to handle when you first meet them, but they're good people, and once they see how successful you are, they'll warm up to you. How successful I am, I repeated. Right. Exactly. Once you start doing business with Leonard, once they see how smart and capable you are, they'll realize they misjudged you. It just takes time. I took a sip of my whiskey and looked at my wife, really looked at her, and realized that she was just as clueless as her family. She thought successful meant making decent money as a consultant. She had no idea that her husband could buy and sell her entire family's precious bank like it was a used car. Well, I said finally, I've made a decision about Summit Bank. Oh good. Claire perked up immediately. Are you going to set up a meeting with Leonard? I knew you'd come around. This could be really great for your business. Actually, I said, savoring the moment, I've decided to close all my accounts there. Transfer everything to overseas banks. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Claire just stared at me like I'd announced I was planning to join the circus or become a professional yodeler. You're, what? She said finally. Closing my accounts. Moving my money. All of it. But why? That's completely insane. Do you have any idea how much business you could get through Leonard's connections? I had to laugh at that. Trust me, babe, I don't need Leonard's connections. This is ridiculous, Claire said, standing up and starting to pace around the living room like a caged animal. You're throwing away an incredible opportunity because your feelings got hurt? That's not how business works. My feelings got hurt, I repeated. Is that what you think this is about? What else could it be? Look, I get it. They weren't exactly warm and fuzzy tonight. But you can't let pride get in the way of smart business decisions. Moving your accounts won't hurt them. It'll just hurt you. I finished my whiskey and set the glass down on the coffee table. We'll see about that. The next morning, while Claire was still sleeping off her frustration from the night before, I called my financial advisor. Marcus Chun had been handling my portfolio for the better part of a decade, and he was one of the few people who actually understood the full scope of what we were dealing with. Marcus, I said when he picked up, it's time to move everything out of Summit Bank. Every account, every investment, every penny. I want it all transferred to our overseas partners within the next 2 weeks. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Everything? That's a significant move. Are you sure about this? Dead sure. And Marcus? Make sure they feel it. 2 weeks. That's all it took for my quiet little act of financial revenge to turn into what I can only describe as the banking equivalent of a natural disaster. 14 days from the moment I made that phone call to Marcus, and Summit Bank went from smugly dismissing my insignificant account to having what I'm pretty sure was a collective nervous breakdown. The first sign that something was happening came on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting in my home office, sipping my coffee and reviewing some quarterly reports from my European holdings, when my phone started buzzing like an angry wasp. Not just one call. We're talking about a full-scale communications assault that would have made a telemarketing company jealous. The first call was from Claire, and she was practically hyperventilating into the phone. What did you do? She demanded, skipping right over pleasantries like hello or good morning, honey. Good morning to you too, sweetheart, I said, leaning back in my chair. I'm having a lovely day. Thanks for asking. How are you? Don't you dare get cute with me right now, she snapped. Leonard called me 20 minutes ago. He sounded, I don't even know how to describe it. Panicked? Terrified? What the hell did you do? Now, I have to admit, hearing that Leonard was panicked gave me a warm, fuzzy feeling that was better than any cup of coffee. I told you what I was going to do. I moved my accounts. Your accounts. Claire's voice went up about 3 octaves. Just how much money are we talking about here? Before I could answer, my phone started buzzing with another call. Leonard himself, according to the caller ID. I couldn't help but grin. Hang on, babe. I think this might be important. I clicked over to the other line. Hello, Leonard. How's your morning going? What the fuck did you do? Leonard's voice was so high-pitched he sounded like he'd been sucking helium. Gone was the smooth, condescending tone from our dinner. This was pure, unadulterated panic. Language, Leonard, I said, thoroughly enjoying myself. That's no way for a banking professional to speak to a former client. Former client? You moved $7 billion. $7 billion. Do you have any idea what you've done? $7 billion. Hearing him say the number out loud was almost as satisfying as the panic in his voice. I moved my money to a bank that appreciates my business. Isn't that what you suggested I do? This isn't a joke. Leonard was practically screaming now. You've triggered a liquidity crisis. We had that money invested, leveraged, tied up in loans. You can't just pull out that kind of capital overnight. Oh, but apparently I could. And I had. Funny thing about money, Leonard. When it's yours, you get to decide where to keep it. The line went quiet for a moment, and I could practically hear the gears turning in Leonard's brain as he tried to figure out how to fix this clusterfuck. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped to what I assume was supposed to be a reasonable, let's make a deal tone. Look, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Maybe we got off on the wrong foot the other night. Why don't you come in, and we can discuss this like reasonable businessmen? Reasonable businessmen, I repeated. That's rich, considering you spent 2 hours telling me I was too uneducated to understand how real business works. Before Leonard could respond, my assistant's voice came through the intercom. Sir, I have Preston Morrison on line 3. He says it's urgent. I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing out loud. Leonard, I'm going to have to let you go. Your father's calling. Wait, don't. I hung up and switched to line 3. Preston, I said cheerfully. What a pleasant surprise. Twice in one day, I get to talk to the Morrison family. Preston's voice was much more controlled than his son's, but I could hear the strain underneath the professional composure. Mr. Grant, I believe there's been some kind of mistake with your account transfer. No mistake, I said. Everything went exactly as planned. I see. Well, perhaps we could schedule a meeting to discuss this situation. I'm sure we can work something out that's beneficial for everyone. Beneficial for everyone, I mused. You know, that's exactly what I was hoping for during our dinner the other night. Funny how perspectives change when the shoe's on the other foot. There was a long pause before Preston spoke again, and when he did, his voice had lost all pretense of casual politeness. Mr. Grant, you need to understand the gravity of this situation. The withdrawal of this amount of capital has serious implications not just for our bank, but for our entire regional economy. Really? But I thought Summit Bank dealt in billions. Surely losing one little account from a small-timer like me wouldn't even register on your radar. Another pause. Longer this time. Perhaps, Preston said carefully, we underestimated the scope of your business interests. Underestimated. That was one way to put it. Perhaps you did. My phone buzzed with yet another call. This time it was my assistant again. Sir, I have Marjorie Morrison on line 4. She's crying. Crying. The woman who had spent an entire evening treating me like something she'd found stuck to her shoe was now crying because her family's bank was imploding. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. Preston, I said, it sounds like your family is having quite a day. Maybe you should go check on them. This isn't over, Preston said, and for the first time, I heard real anger in his voice instead of panic. You're absolutely right, I replied. It's not. After I hung up, I sat back in my chair and looked out the window at my perfectly manicured lawn. Somewhere across town, the Morrison family was probably having the worst day of their privileged lives, watching their century-old banking empire teetering on the edge of collapse because they'd decided to mock the wrong guy at dinner. My assistant's voice came through the intercom again. Sir, there's someone here from Summit Bank's board of directors. He says they've called an emergency meeting. I checked my watch. It wasn't even noon yet, and Summit Bank's board was already in crisis mode. Marcus had warned me that pulling out $7 billion overnight would cause problems, but even I hadn't expected this level of chaos this quickly. Tell him I'll be right there, I said, straightening my tie. Time to go watch a banking dynasty crumble in real time. And the best part? The show was just getting started. Walking into Summit Bank's main building felt like entering a war zone where the war was being fought with calculators and panic attacks instead of guns and bombs. The lobby, which normally buzzed with the quiet efficiency of financial professionals going about their business, had the frantic energy of an emergency room during a multi-car pileup. Employees were scurrying around with stacks of papers. Phones were ringing nonstop, and I could see more than a few people who looked like they were seriously considering updating their resumes. The receptionist, a young woman who probably made more in a year than most people's parents, looked up at me with the kind of desperate expression usually reserved for people who've just watched their house burn down. "Mr. Grant, they're waiting for you in the main boardroom. 32nd floor, elevator bank to your right." I thanked her and made my way to the elevators, passing clusters of employees who were having hushed, urgent conversations. I caught fragments of words like liquidity crisis, emergency protocols, and how the hell did this happen? It was like walking through the financial equivalent of a natural disaster site. The elevator ride to the 30th floor was probably the longest minute and a half of my life, not because I was nervous, but because I was trying so hard not to laugh out loud that I was practically giving myself an aneurysm. By the time the doors opened, I had composed myself enough to look appropriately serious for what was about to be the most satisfying business meeting of my entire career. The boardroom was exactly what you'd expect from a century-old bank trying to prove its importance. All dark wood paneling, leather chairs that probably cost more than most people's cars, and oil paintings of dead white guys who'd apparently been very important at some point in banking history. But the atmosphere in the room was anything but impressive. It felt more like a funeral parlor where everyone was still arguing about how the deceased had died. Preston Morrison sat at the head of the table, looking like he'd aged about 10 years since our dinner 2 weeks ago. His usually perfect silver hair was slightly disheveled, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't been sleeping well. Marjorie sat to his right, her designer makeup doing its best to hide what appeared to be genuine distress. And Leonard. Oh, Leonard looked like he'd been hit by a truck, backed over by the same truck, and then had the truck parked on his chest for good measure. "Mr. Grant," Preston said, standing up as I entered the room. His voice was carefully controlled, but I could hear the strain underneath. "Thank you for agreeing to meet with us." "Of course," I said. Taking the seat across from them like this was just another business meeting instead of the financial apocalypse I'd single-handedly triggered. I have to say, this is a much nicer venue than our last conversation. The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a chainsaw. Preston cleared his throat and sat back down, his hands folded on the table like he was trying to keep them from shaking. "Mr. Grant, that is, I believe we owe you an apology." "An apology?" From Preston Morrison. The man who'd spent an entire evening talking about me like I was some kind of financial parasite was now apologizing. If someone had told me 2 weeks ago that this moment would happen, I'd have suggested they seek professional help. An apology for what, exactly? I asked, because I wanted to hear him say it. I wanted to hear every single word of their admission that they'd fucked up spectacularly. Preston's jaw tightened, but he pushed forward. "We regret our earlier comments. They were inappropriate and unprofessional." Inappropriate and unprofessional, I repeated slowly. That's one way to describe spending 2 hours mocking someone's education and calling them a financial burden. Marjorie, who had been sitting there looking like she was attending her own execution, finally spoke up. "We didn't mean, that is, we were just..." She trailed off, apparently unable to find words that would adequately explain away their behavior. "Which comments, specifically, are we talking about here?" I continued, because I was enjoying this way too much to let them off easy. "The ones about me being too uneducated to run a business? The ones about my money not matching? Or maybe the ones about Claire needing your family's financial support when my little consulting firm inevitably fails?" Leonard, who had been staring at the table like it held the secrets of the universe, finally looked up. His face was pale, and when he spoke, his voice cracked like a 13-year-old boy's. "We didn't know. I mean, we had no idea about the scope of your financial position." And there it was, the admission I'd been waiting for. They weren't sorry for being assholes. They were sorry for being assholes to someone who turned out to be richer than they were. "So you're not sorry for treating someone badly," I said. "You're sorry for treating the wrong someone badly." Preston held up his hand like he was trying to stop a runaway train. "That's not what we meant. We're genuinely sorry for our behavior, regardless of circumstances." "Circumstances," I laughed. "Is that what we're calling $7 billion now? Circumstances." The number hung in the air like a nuclear bomb that had just been dropped on the table. I watched as the full reality of what had happened settled over them like a heavy blanket. $7 billion. Nearly half of their bank's total assets under management. Gone. Overnight. Because they decided to play status games with the wrong guy. Marjorie's hands were actually trembling now. Mr. Grant, surely we can work something out. There must be some way to resolve this situation that works for everyone. Resolve this situation, I said. You mean the situation where your bank is now teetering on the edge of collapse because you assumed I was some kind of charity case? Leonard leaned forward desperately. Look, we fucked up. We admit it. We were wrong about everything. But pulling your money out like that, it's not just hurting us. There are innocent people who work here, people who had nothing to do with what happened at dinner. That actually gave me pause for a moment. He was right. There were probably hundreds of employees at Summit Bank who were now facing unemployment because their bosses had terminal cases of elitist assholery. But then I remembered the way they'd talked about me, the condescension, the barely concealed disgust, and my sympathy evaporated like morning dew. You know what, Leonard? You're absolutely right. There are innocent people who are going to suffer because of this. But here's the thing. They're not suffering because I moved my money. They're suffering because you and your family are apparently too stupid to run a bank without insulting your biggest clients. Preston's face was getting redder by the minute. Mr. Grant, what exactly do you want from us? What did I want? That was a damn good question. I wanted them to understand what it felt like to be dismissed and belittled. I wanted them to realize that their century of inherited privilege didn't make them better than anyone else. I wanted them to learn that actions have consequences, even when you're rich and connected. But mostly, I wanted them to squirm a little bit more before I decided whether or not to completely destroy their family's legacy. I was just about to answer Preston's question about what exactly I wanted from them. And let me tell you, I had some very creative ideas brewing. When the boardroom door opened with the kind of dramatic timing that Hollywood screenwriters dream about. The whole room turned to look, and I swear you could have heard a pin drop in the next county. In walked Miles Barrett, chairman of Summit Bank's board of directors. And let me tell you something about Miles. This guy was old-school banking royalty. We're talking about a man who'd been making financial decisions since before some of these people were born, who'd survived more market crashes than most people had seen movies, and who commanded the kind of respect that made grown bankers wet themselves when he walked into a room. But here's the thing that made this moment absolutely fucking perfect. Miles Barrett and I went way back. Not in some casual, we met at a conference once way, but in a we've done serious international business together for years way. We'd worked on trade deals that involved moving more money across borders than some countries' entire GDP. He knew exactly who I was and exactly what I was worth, down to the last penny. Miles, I said, standing up with a genuine smile spreading across my face. What a pleasant surprise. The effect on the Morrison family was immediate and spectacular. Preston's face went from red to white so fast I was worried he might be having some kind of medical emergency. Marjorie's mouth actually fell open, like she was a cartoon character who'd just seen something impossible. And Leonard, poor Leonard looked like he'd just watched his entire world collapse in real time. Which, come to think of it, was exactly what was happening. Miles walked over and shook my hand with the kind of firm, respectful grip that two equals exchange when they've done serious business together. Good to see you again. Though I have to say, I wish it were under better circumstances. Better circumstances, I repeated, glancing back at the Morrison family, who were all staring at us like we were speaking in ancient hieroglyphics. Well, circumstances have a way of working themselves out, don't they? Miles looked around the table at Preston, Marjorie, and Leonard, and I could see something shift in his expression. It wasn't quite anger. Miles was too professional for that, but it was definitely disapproval of the highest order. We need to talk, he said to Preston, but his tone suggested it was less of a request and more of a direct order from the man who could fire him with a phone call. Of course, Miles, Preston said, trying to regain some composure. We were just discussing the situation with Mr. Grant here. The situation, Miles said slowly, like he was tasting something unpleasant. Is that what we're calling it? He turned to me with an expression that was part apology and part professional damage control. I want you to know that the board had absolutely no knowledge of how our staff had been treating one of our most important clients. Most important clients. The words hung in the air like a neon sign advertising the Morrison family's complete and utter failure to do their basic fucking job. I could see Leonard's face cycling through about 17 different emotions, landing somewhere between humiliation and the dawning realization that his career was probably over. Most important, Marjorie whispered, like she was afraid to say it too loud in case it made it more real. Miles looked at her with the kind of expression you'd give a child who'd just asked why the sky was blue. Mrs. Morrison, your husband's bank has been managing Mr. Grant's portfolio for nearly a decade. His account represents. He paused, apparently doing some mental math. Approximately 47% of Summit Bank's total assets under management. 47%. Holy shit. Even I hadn't realized it was quite that much. I mean, I knew $7 billion was a lot of money, but hearing it put in those terms, nearly half of their entire fucking bank, that was beautiful. That was poetry. Leonard's voice came out as barely more than a croak. Wait, you know the chairman personally? I looked at Leonard like he'd just asked if water was wet. Leonard, Miles and I have been working together on international trade projects for years. We've moved more money across borders than most countries see in their annual budgets. We've collaborated on deals involving pharmaceutical supply chains from Southeast Asia, technology transfers between European and American companies, and logistics networks that span 3 continents. Miles added, apparently deciding that the Morrison family needed the full scope of their fuck-up spelled out in excruciating detail. Mr. Grant isn't just a client. He's one of the most sophisticated international businessmen I've ever had the pleasure of working with. The silence that followed was the kind of complete, crushing quiet that usually occurs right after someone drops a nuclear bomb. Preston was staring at me like I'd just sprouted wings and announced I was actually an alien from Mars. Marjorie looked like she was about to faint. And Leonard looked like he was mentally updating his resume while simultaneously planning his suicide. But you didn't go to college, Marjorie said weakly, like this was some kind of defense against the reality that was crashing down around them. No, I said cheerfully. I didn't. Turns out you don't need a fancy degree to build a multi-billion-dollar international business empire. Who knew? Miles turned to look at the Morrison family with an expression that could have frozen lava. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. You treated one of our most valuable clients with disrespect because you assumed his educational background made him, what? Unworthy of your attention? It wasn't like that, Preston started, but Miles held up a hand that shut him up faster than a power switch. Actually, let me tell you exactly what it was like, Miles said, his voice getting colder with every word. You took one look at a man who's brought more revenue to this bank than any other single client in our history, decided he wasn't good enough for your social circle, and proceeded to mock him for an entire evening. Is that about right? No one answered. Probably because what the hell could they say? Yes, we're exactly that stupid and arrogant. Miles continued, apparently not done with his verbal demolition of the Morrison dynasty. Do you have any idea what this is going to cost us? Not just the immediate liquidity crisis, but the reputation damage? Word is already spreading through the financial community that Summit Bank drove away a multi-billion-dollar client because of personal prejudice. Miles, Preston said desperately, surely we can work something out. This is all just a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding, Miles repeated. Preston, you've been in banking for 30 years. Tell me, in your professional opinion, what do you think happens to banks that insult their biggest clients? Preston's mouth moved, but no sound came out. He looked like a fish that had been pulled out of water and was slowly suffocating on dry land. Miles turned back to me, and his expression softened considerably. I want you to know that the board is taking this matter very seriously. There will be consequences. What kind of consequences? I asked, genuinely curious about how this was going to play out. Well, Miles said, glancing back at the Morrison family. For starters, Preston will be stepping down as bank president effective immediately. The board has lost confidence in his ability to manage client relationships. Preston made a sound like he'd been punched in the stomach. Stepping down as bank president wasn't just losing a job. It was losing the family legacy, the social status, everything the Morrison name had built over the past century. And Leonard, Miles continued, turning to the golden boy who was looking decidedly less golden by the minute. Your department head position is being terminated as of today. Effective immediately. Leonard's face went through about 6 different shades of pale before settling on something that looked like green around the gills. You can't. I mean, this isn't all my fault. Actually, Leonard, it is entirely your fault, Miles said with the kind of calm precision that made it clear this decision was final. You had dinner with one of our most important clients and decided to mock his background instead of treating him with the respect he deserved. That's not just unprofessional, it's catastrophically stupid. Marjorie, who had been sitting there looking like she was watching her entire world collapse in slow motion, finally found her voice. This is all getting blown out of proportion. It was just dinner conversation. People say things they don't mean all the time. Miles looked at her like she'd just suggested that gravity was optional. Mrs. Morrison, your dinner conversation just cost this bank $7 billion and potentially triggered the worst financial crisis in our company's history. I'm not sure how much more in proportion this situation could possibly get. I had to give it to Miles. He knew how to deliver a professional ass-kicking with style. Watching the Morrison family realize that their century of inherited privilege wasn't going to save them from the consequences of their own arrogance was better than any movie I'd ever seen. So what happens now? Preston asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Miles looked at him for a long moment before answering. Now? Now you clean out your office, collect your personal belongings, and try to figure out how to explain to your wife's social circle why the Morrison family name is no longer associated with Summit Bank. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was the moment when 100 years of banking dynasty officially came to an end, killed by nothing more than bad manners and the assumption that money always knows where it comes from. Hashtag Chapter 10 moving on. A month. That's all it took for the Morrison family's century-old banking empire to completely collapse like a house of cards in a hurricane. 30 days from the moment Miles Barrett dropped the hammer on Preston and Leonard, and Summit Bank went from being a pillar of the local financial community to a cautionary tale that business schools would probably be teaching for the next 50 years. The fallout was absolutely spectacular to watch, and I'm not gonna lie, I enjoyed every single minute of it. You know that feeling you get when you're watching a really good movie and the villain finally gets what's coming to them? It was like that, except instead of watching it on Netflix, I had front row seats to the real thing. Preston's resignation became official within 48 hours of our boardroom meeting. The man who had spent an entire evening lecturing me about the importance of proper education and social connections found himself updating his LinkedIn profile for the first time in 3 decades. The board didn't just ask him to step down, they basically launched him out of the building with a corporate catapult. Word through the financial grapevine was that his severance package was about as generous as a parking ticket, and his reputation in the banking community was roughly equivalent to that of someone who'd been caught embezzling from a children's charity. Leonard's professional demise was even more satisfying, if that was possible. The golden boy who had smirked at me about my high school education found himself learning what it was like to be unemployed with a resume that now included drove away the bank's biggest client through sheer arrogance as his most recent accomplishment. I heard through Claire, back when we were still speaking, that he'd been blacklisted from every major financial institution in the region. Apparently, when you cost a bank $7 billion through your own stupidity, other banks tend to view you as something of a liability. But the real cherry on top of this revenge sundae was what happened to Marjorie. The woman who had spent our entire dinner treating me like a fascinating specimen from the wrong side of the tracks discovered that her social status was directly tied to her husband's professional position. When Preston fell from grace, she fell right along with him. The country club memberships, the charity board positions, the invitations to all the right social events. All of it evaporated faster than water in the desert. I heard she'd tried to maintain her position by claiming the whole thing was just a misunderstanding, but apparently the local social elite weren't buying it. Nothing kills your standing in high society quite like being married to the guy who destroyed a century-old bank through bad manners. The bank itself managed to survive, barely, but it wasn't the same institution that the Morrison family had built. Miles Barrett and the board had to bring in emergency capital from overseas investors, restructure their entire leadership team, and basically rebuild the company from the ground up. They kept the Summit Bank name, but everyone in the financial world knew it was essentially a completely different organization wearing the skin of the old one. And Claire? Well, that's where things got really interesting, and by interesting, I mean, it turned into the kind of personal drama that would have made the producers of a soap opera weep with joy. About a week after the boardroom meeting, Claire came home from lunch with her girlfriends looking like she'd been hit by a truck carrying bad news. She walked into our living room where I was reading a book about international trade regulations. Light reading, I know, and just stood there staring at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "Is it true?" she asked without any preamble. "Is what true?" I replied, though I had a pretty good idea where this was heading. "The money. All of it. Sarah Henderson's husband works at Summit, and he told her things about your accounts that I can't even." She trailed off, apparently unable to finish the sentence. I set down my book and looked at my wife, really looked at her, and realized that this was the moment our marriage was either going to survive or completely implode. "What specifically did Sarah Henderson's husband tell her?" "He said you had $7 billion in that bank." $7 billion. With AB. She said it like she was announcing that I'd been diagnosed with a terminal illness. "He said you've been one of their biggest clients for years, that you own companies all over the world, that you're actually rich," I suggested. "Successful? Everything you thought I wasn't." Claire sat down hard on the couch like her legs had given out. "Why didn't you tell me? How could you not tell me something like that?" It was a fair question, and one I'd been asking myself a lot lately. Because I liked being married to someone who loved me for who I was, not what I could buy them. Because I enjoyed having a wife who didn't see dollar signs when she looked at me. "But I had a right to know," she protested. "We're married. Married people don't keep secrets like that from each other." "Really?" I asked. "Because you seemed perfectly fine with keeping the secret that your family thought I was trash. You sat there for 2 hours while they mocked me, and you said nothing. You told me I was being too sensitive, that I should learn to take a joke. So forgive me if I'm not entirely convinced about your commitment to honesty in this marriage." That shut her up for about 30 seconds, which might have been a new record. When she finally spoke again, her voice was different, harder, more calculating. "Do you have any idea how humiliated I am? My entire family is a laughingstock because of what you did. Preston's career is over. Leonard can't find work anywhere. And my mother calls me crying every day about how you've destroyed the family name." And there it was. Not, "I'm sorry my family treated you terribly." Not, "I should have defended you." It was, "How could you humiliate my family like this?" She was more concerned about the Morrison family's reputation than she was about the fact that her husband had been systematically insulted and belittled by the people who were supposed to welcome him into their family. "Your family destroyed themselves," I said calmly. "I just provided the consequences for their actions." "Consequences?" Claire's voice went up about 3 octaves. "You destroyed their lives. Preston worked his entire career to build that bank, and you tore it down in 2 weeks because your feelings got hurt." My feelings got hurt. Again, after everything that had happened, after watching her family's financial empire crumble because they couldn't be bothered to treat me with basic human decency, she still thought this was about hurt feelings. "Claire," I said, standing up and walking over to the window that looked out onto our perfectly manicured lawn. "Do you want to know the really sad part about all of this?" "What?" she asked, though her tone suggested she wasn't really interested in my perspective. "The really sad part is that none of this had to happen. If your family had just treated me like a human being, not even with respect, just basic human courtesy, we'd all be having Christmas dinner together this year. Preston would still be running his bank, Leonard would still have his job, and Marjorie would still be queen of her little social circle." I turned back to look at her. But instead, they decided to spend an entire evening making jokes about my education, my background, and my worth as a human being. And you sat there and let it happen. Worse than that, you told me I was wrong to be upset about it. Claire was quiet for a long moment, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. When she finally spoke, her voice was cold in a way I'd never heard before. "So what happens now? Do you expect me to just pretend that you didn't humiliate my entire family? Do you think we can just go back to normal after this?" "Normal?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Claire, there is no normal after this. Your family showed me exactly what they think of me, and you showed me exactly where your loyalties lie. The question isn't whether we can go back to normal. The question is whether there's anything left to go back to." The divorce proceedings started 2 weeks later. Claire claimed I had humiliated her family and made it impossible for her to maintain her social standing. I reminded her that her family had humiliated themselves, and that maybe she should reconsider what was actually important in life. We agreed to disagree, and our lawyers handled the rest. The settlement was, let's call it generous. I gave Claire enough money to maintain whatever lifestyle she wanted, along with the house and pretty much everything else she asked for. Not because I felt guilty about what had happened to her family, but because I realized that holding on to someone who valued social status more than loyalty was like trying to hold on to water with your bare hands. The funny thing about money, and I mean really funny, not just ironic, is that once people know you have it, everything changes. Suddenly, I was getting invitations to charity galas, investment opportunities, and social events that I'd never been invited to before. Business acquaintances who had barely acknowledged my existence were suddenly my best friends. It was like someone had flipped a switch and transformed me from an invisible nobody into the most popular guy in town. But here's what I learned from the whole experience. When people only want to know you because of your bank account, you're not actually popular. You're just a walking ATM machine. The invitations, the friendships, the business opportunities, they were all contingent on what I could do for other people, not on who I was as a person. So I did what any rational person would do in that situation. I kept my wealth exactly where it had always been, working quietly in the background while I lived my life on my own terms. I bought a smaller house in a different part of town, kept driving my reliable car, and continued wearing jeans and comfortable shirts because that's who I was, not who my money said I should be. These days, when I walk past a Summit Bank branch, and yes, they still exist, though they're shadows of their former selves, I can't help but smile. Not because I destroyed a family or ruined careers, but because I learned something valuable about human nature. People will judge you based on the most superficial criteria imaginable, and they'll treat you accordingly. But money, real money, has a funny way of revealing who people really are when the masks come off. The Morrison family thought a high school diploma meant I was nobody worth knowing. They learned, at the cost of $7 billion and their family legacy, that education and worth aren't the same thing. Sometimes the most important lessons are the most expensive ones, and sometimes the people who need to learn them the most are the ones who can least afford the tuition. And every now and then, justice actually does have a sense of humor. I stood there in our sleek, modern kitchen, staring at the charred mess that used to be my passport. The acrid smell of burnt plastic stung my nose as the last wisps of smoke curled up from the marble island. The blue cover was now a blackened, shriveled husk, its edges crumbling like ash. My wife, Brielle, sat just a few feet away, casually sipping her green smoothie, her manicured fingers scrolling through her phone as if she hadn't just set fire to my identity. She didn't even look up when she spoke, her voice dripping with that smug tone I'd grown to hate. "You don't need it," she said, smirking like it was some clever joke. "Stay home and take care of the kids. That's what poor husbands do. I'm going to relax." Relax. That's what she called it. She was jetting off to Santorini tomorrow with Noah, her lover. She thought I didn't know. She thought I was too dumb, too buried in my work, to notice the late-night texts, the girls' trips, the way she'd started dressing up for errands. But I knew. I'd known for months. What she didn't know, what I hadn't told a soul yet, was that I just signed the deal of my life. My startup, the little project I'd poured 15 years into, had sold to an international conglomerate for $2 billion. Billion, with a capital B. Cash in my pocket, freedom in my hands, and she had no clue. I'd kept it quiet, even from her, because I wanted to surprise her with a new life. Maybe that villa in Italy we'd talked about years ago, back when she still looked at me like I mattered. But now I saw the truth. She didn't deserve the surprise. She didn't deserve me. I didn't say a word as she finished her smoothie and sauntered upstairs, humming like she'd won some grand victory. I waited until the house was still, the kids tucked into their beds, their soft breathing filling the silence. Then I moved. I grabbed a duffel bag from the closet, stuffed it with clothes, my laptop, a few essentials. I opened the safe in my office, the one she didn't know the code to, and pulled out stacks of cash, some documents, a spare key fob for the car I'd bought last year and never told her about. I didn't need much. I wasn't running away in a panic. This was calculated. This was me taking back control. Before I left, I walked back to the kitchen. The passport's ashes were still there, a dark smear on the marble. I grabbed a pen and a notepad from the drawer, scribbled a quick message. "You're right. I'll stay home. Enjoy your trip." I left it next to the ashes, knowing she'd see it in the morning. She'd think it was surrender. She'd laugh, maybe text Noah about how pathetic I was. Let her. I locked the door behind me, got into my car, a black SUV she'd never cared to notice, and drove into the night. The city lights blurred past me as I headed downtown, my mind racing but calm. I wasn't the broken man she thought she'd left behind. I was something else now, something she'd never see coming. The penthouse suite I checked into was a world away from our suburban mansion, glass walls, a view of the skyline, silence that felt like power. I dropped my bag, poured a glass of whiskey from the minibar, and sat on the leather couch, staring out at the city. My phone buzzed. Brielle? Probably, but I didn't check. Not yet. I needed this moment to breathe, to feel the weight of what I'd done. $2 billion. A burned passport. A wife who thought she'd outsmarted me. The kids were safe with the nanny for now. I'd figure that out tomorrow. Tonight was about me reclaiming my life. I leaned back, sipping the whiskey, letting the burn in my throat match the fire in my chest. She thought she'd trapped me, grounded me, turned me into her little stay-at-home puppet while she danced off with her lover. But she'd misjudged me. Badly. I wasn't staying home. I wasn't poor. And I sure as hell wasn't done. Tomorrow, she'd wake up to an empty house and a rude awakening. I'd left her something she couldn't ignore, not just the note, but the first hint of the storm I was about to unleash. This wasn't over. It was just beginning. I woke up to sunlight streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new penthouse suite, the city sprawling out below me like a map of possibilities. The leather couch creaked as I sat up, my neck stiff from sleeping in an awkward position, but my mind was sharp. I'd left the house last night, walked away from Brielle and her smug little game, and now I was free. The duffel bag sat in the corner, a reminder of how little I'd needed to take with me. My phone buzzed on the glass coffee table, 10 missed calls, a dozen texts, all from her. I didn't read them yet. I knew what they'd say. Confusion at first, then anger, then some half-baked excuse. She'd woken up to an empty bed, a missing husband, and that note next to the ashes of my passport. Good. Let her stew. I showered, letting the hot water wash away the last traces of our old life, then dressed in a crisp shirt and jeans, clothes she'd never picked out for me. My first call was to Juno, my lawyer. She answered on the second ring, her voice calm and professional, like always. You're up early, she said. Everything okay? I told her everything. Brielle burning my passport, her trip to Santorini with Noah, the way she'd mocked me like I was some broke loser. Then I dropped the bombshell. I sold the startup. $2 billion. Signed yesterday. There was a pause, then a low whistle. Well, damn, Juno said. Congratulations. And what do you want to do about her? I smiled, staring out at the skyline. Lock her out. Everything joint. Accounts, cards, access. I want it frozen by noon. Next, I called Theo, my business partner, and the only guy who'd stuck with me through the lean years. He'd been in the room when I signed the deal, grinning like a kid on Christmas. You're a genius, he'd said then. And now, when I told him I'd left Brielle, he laughed. About time. What's the plan? I told him I needed to meet some people, start putting pieces in place. He offered to handle the press if it leaked about the sale, keep my name quiet for now. I agreed. Discretion was my weapon. By midday, Juno texted. Done. Accounts frozen. She's got nothing but what's in her purse. I pictured Brielle in Santorini, swiping her card for a cocktail and getting that polite declined from the waiter. She'd call me then, furious, demanding answers. I wouldn't pick up. I poured myself a coffee from the sweets machine, strong and black, and sat at the desk, pulling laptop open, planning my next move. The penthouse was paid for in cash, $2 million up front, no mortgage, no trail back to me yet. I'd used a shell company, something Theo had set up years ago for tax purposes. Brielle wouldn't find me here. She didn't even know I had the money to afford a place like this. To her, I was still the guy scraping by, the poor husband she'd sneered at. I needed allies now, people who could help me turn this mess into something I controlled. My first stop was Isla, Noah's fiancée. She didn't know her man was halfway to Greece with my wife, probably sipping wine and laughing about how they'd pulled one over on us. I found her number through a mutual friend, called, and asked to meet. It's urgent, I said. She sounded wary but agreed. Coffee shop, downtown, 1 hour. I grabbed my keys and headed out. Isla was waiting at a corner table, her blonde hair pulled back, her face tight with stress. She didn't know me well, just as Brielle's husband, the quiet guy who didn't say much at parties. I sat down, ordered a coffee, and got straight to it. Noah's cheating on you. With Brielle. They're in Santorini right now. Her eyes went wide, then hard. You're lying, she said, but her voice shook. I pulled out my phone, showed her the photos I'd had a PI snap. Brielle and Noah boarding the plane, his hand on her leg, her laughing like she didn't have a care in the world. Isla's face crumpled, but she didn't cry. She just stared, then whispered, "That bastard." I leaned forward, keeping my voice low. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here because we can help each other." She burned my passport to keep me stuck while they ran off. But I'm not stuck. I've got resources now, more than they know. And I'm going to use them. Isla looked up, her jaw tight. "What do you mean?" I told her about the sale, the money, the power I had now. They think they've won. They haven't. I just need proof, something to bury them. She nodded slowly, then pulled out her own phone. "I've got his cloud password. Let me check something." We sat there, sipping coffee, as she scrolled through Noah's backup folder. Her fingers froze. "Oh my God," she muttered, turning the screen to me. Texts. Dozens of them. Noah and Brielle plotting. How they'd drain our accounts. How they'd frame me as the bad guy. How they'd live big while I took the fall. "He said you were broke," Isla read aloud. "Said you'd never recover." I laughed, a bitter sound. "He's about to find out how wrong he is." Isla handed me the phone. "Take it. Use it. I want him to pay." I copied the texts, sent them to Juno with a note. "Start building the case." This wasn't just about revenge, it was about justice. Brielle thought she'd torched my life when she burned that passport, but all she'd done was light the fuse. I thanked Isla, promised to keep her in the loop, and left the coffee shop with a fire in my gut. The penthouse waited, my new command center. I wasn't hiding anymore. I was hunting. I sat in the penthouse that night, the city lights twinkling outside like a million little eyes watching me piece my life back together. Isla's texts from Noah's phone were open on my laptop, each message a dagger Brielle and her lover had aimed at my back. I couldn't stop reading them, even though every word burned. "He's clueless," Noah had written. "Thinks he's still got a shot at something big. Wait till we cash out." Brielle's reply. "He's too busy playing dad. Won't even notice till it's gone." They've been planning this for months, siphoning money, setting me up to look like a failure while they ran off to live their fantasy. The joke was on them. I wasn't broke. I wasn't clueless. And I sure as hell wasn't done. I called Juno again, pacing the hardwood floor, the phone pressed tight to my ear. "You got the texts?" I asked when she picked up. "Yeah," she said, her voice steady but sharp. "This analytics, these are gold. I'm pulling footage from the house cams too, got them from the cloud backup. Sending it now." She paused, then added, "You're calm for a guy whose wife just torched his passport." I laughed, a rough sound. "Calm's all I've got left. Send it fast. I want this airtight." Juno promised to have a draft of the legal filings by morning, restraining orders, asset freezes, the works. I hung up and sank into the couch, rubbing my temples. The penthouse was quiet, too quiet, but it gave me space to think. I wasn't just fighting for money or pride. This was about the kids, about the life I'd built. Brielle could burn my passport, but she wasn't burning that. The footage came through 10 minutes later, grainy clips from the security cams I'd installed after Brielle staged that fake break-in last year. She'd claimed someone tried to jimmy the back door, but I'd never bought it. Now, watching the clips, I saw why. There she was, late at night, sneaking Noah into the garage, laughing as they stumbled inside. Another clip showed her rifling through my desk, probably looking for cash or bank statements. She'd even waved at the camera once, mocking me, thinking I'd never check. Dumb move. I saved every second of it, tagged it for Juno. This wasn't just evidence, it was ammunition. My phone buzzed again. "Brielle, where are you? Card's not working. Call me." I smirked, imagining her stranded in Santorini, tapping her foot in those ridiculous heels, yelling at some poor hotel clerk. Noah was probably sweating too, now that Isla had tipped off his firm about his extended leave. I didn't reply. Let them squirm. I had bigger fish to fry. I called Isla back, catching her just as she was leaving Noah's apartment. "Found more," she said, her voice tight. "Receipts. Plane tickets. Hotel bookings, all in his name, but paid with your card." My card. The joint one she'd linked to her phone for emergencies. I gritted my teeth. "Send it over." "You okay?" She sighed. "No, but I will be. He's not getting away with this." I liked her grit. She was collateral damage, like me, but she wasn't curling up to cry about it. She was fighting. The receipts hit my inbox, thousands spent on first-class tickets, a suite at some fancy Greek resort, dinners I'd never eaten. Every charge was a slap in the face, but it was also a gift. Proof. I forwarded it to Juno with a note, add theft to the list. My startup sale wasn't public yet. Theo was keeping it under wraps, but the money was already in my new accounts, offshore and untouchable. Brielle thought she drained me dry. She hadn't even scratched the surface. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The penthouse smelled like new paint and leather, a clean slate. I thought about the kids 6 and 8, probably confused this morning when I wasn't there to make pancakes. The nanny had them covered, but I'd need to see them soon, explain things without poisoning them against their mom. That'd be tough. I didn't want them hating her, even if I did. They deserved better than our mess. My mind drifted to Noah. Smug bastard. I pulled up his firm's website, some mid-tier investment group. His bio bragged about integrity and client trust. Hypocrite. Isla said she'd emailed his boss screenshots of the texts, plus a heads-up about his little vacation. By now, he was probably getting calls, scrambling to explain. I hoped he choked on it. The footage kept playing on my laptop, loop after loop of Brielle and Noah in my house, my space, acting like they owned it. One clip showed her burning my passport, holding it over the stove with tongs, giggling as the flames caught. Bon voyage, loser, she'd said, dropping it on the counter. I froze the frame, saved it. That was Exhibit A, malicious intent, clear as day. Juno would eat it up. I stood, stretching, and walked to the window. The city hummed below, oblivious to my war. I wasn't just gathering evidence to protect myself. I was building a case to bury them. Theft, fraud, maybe even destruction of property. I didn't care about jail time for her. I just wanted her stripped bare, financially and socially. Noah too. Let them see what it's like to lose everything. Isla texted again. He's calling me. Not answering. You. I typed back. Radio silence. Stay strong. She sent a thumbs up. I liked her more every minute. She wasn't just a victim. She was a partner in this now, whether she knew it or not. I sat back down, pulling up a blank document. The real plan was taking shape, not just defense, but offense. I'd expose them, not with loud accusations, but with quiet, undeniable facts. Alara, a journalist friend, owed me a favor from way back when I helped her source a tech story. She'd love this: suburban betrayal, money, sex, the whole soap opera. I shot her an email. Got a scoop. Off record for now. Coffee tomorrow. She'd bite. I could already see the headline. The clock ticked past midnight, but I wasn't tired. Adrenaline kept me sharp. Every text, every clip, every receipt was a brick in the wall I was building, one they'd never climb over. Brielle thought she'd burn me out of her life. She didn't know she'd just handed me the match. I sat at the desk in my penthouse, the laptop screen glowing with those damning texts and videos, but my mind wasn't on them anymore. It drifted back, way back, to the beginning, 12 years ago, when Brielle and I first met. I was just a scrappy coder then, hunched over a beat-up laptop in a garage that smelled like motor oil and stale coffee. She'd walked in with a friend, all bright eyes and easy smiles, wearing a sundress that caught the light. I'd been debugging code for 16 hours straight, my hair a mess, my shirt wrinkled, but she didn't care. You look like you're building the future, she'd said, leaning against the workbench. I laughed, shy and awkward, and told her it was just a dumb app idea. She stayed anyway, asking questions, listening like she actually cared. That was the Brielle I fell for, the one who saw something in me when I was nothing. Now, staring out at the city lights, I wondered where that girl went. Back then, I was all ambition, working late nights, scraping by on ramen and hope. She liked it at first, called me her dreamer, said she'd be there when I made it big. We got married 2 years later, a small ceremony in her parents' backyard, me in a borrowed suit, her glowing in white. I promised her the world, and I meant it. But as my startup grew, so did her expectations. The app turned into a platform, the platform into a company, and suddenly I wasn't just a dreamer. I was a machine she wanted to tune. She started picking my clothes, telling me my old jeans were embarrassing now that I had investors to impress. My buddies from college? Too scruffy, she'd say, steering me toward her polished friends instead. Even my family got the cold shoulder. She'd make excuses to skip dinners with my mom, my brother Kai, saying they didn't fit her vibe. I let it happen. That's the part that stings now. I was so focused on building something real, something that'd last, that I didn't see her reshaping me into her accessory. The late nights at the office weren't just about work. They were my escape from her constant nudges, her little digs about how I wasn't fun anymore. She wanted luxury, status, the Instagram life, while I was still the guy who'd rather fix a bug than sip champagne at some gala. Over time, I became this curated version of myself, clean-shaven, buttoned up, quiet at her parties because she'd trained me to be. I thought it was compromise. It wasn't. It was control. The passport burning? That was her final move, her way of saying I didn't matter anymore. Stay home, she'd smirked, like I was some lapdog she could chain up while she ran off with Noah. She didn't just want me out of the picture, she wanted me small, powerless, a footnote in her shiny new story. I poured a glass of water from the penthouse sink, gulping it down as the memory hit me harder. 12 years, 2 kids, a life I'd built brick by brick, and she'd lit a match to it like it was trash. But she didn't know the half of it. She didn't know I'd sold the company, that I'd turned that garage dream into $2 billion. To her, I was still the broke coder, the poor husband she could mock. She'd married a lie, but not the one she thought. I walked to the window, pressing my hand against the cool glass. The city buzzed below, alive and indifferent. I thought about the early days, how we'd stay up late dreaming about trips we couldn't afford, like that villa in Florence I'd sketched out on a napkin once. She'd laughed, said we'd go someday when I made it. I made it, all right. And now I was here, alone in a penthouse, while she was sipping wine in Santorini with a guy who thought he'd won her. The irony twisted in my gut. I'd spent years building something for us, for the kids, and she'd traded it for a fling and a tan. My phone buzzed, another text from her. This isn't funny. Where's the money? I didn't answer. She'd figure it out soon enough, when the cards kept declining, when Noah's promises fell flat. I wasn't the guy she'd married anymore, not the naive dreamer she could mold. I was something else now, something she'd underestimated. The footage from the house cams, the text from Isla, the receipts, they were all pieces of the puzzle, but this wasn't just about evidence. It was about me remembering who I was before her. I thought about the kids again, how she'd dress them up like little dolls for her social media, how she'd roll her eyes when I took them to the park instead of some cute brunch spot. She'd turned our family into her backdrop, and I'd let her. No more. I'd get them back, give them a life that wasn't about likes or filters. I'd show them the world, Florence, maybe, like I'd promised myself years ago. Brielle could keep her Santorini. I'd take the real stuff. I sat back down, running a hand through my hair. The penthouse felt too big, too empty, but it was mine. No trace of her here. No perfume. No demands. No smirks. Just me and the truth. She'd burn my passport to keep me grounded, to clip my wings while she flew off. But I wasn't the backup plan she thought I was. I was the main event, the guy who'd built an empire while she was busy posing. She'd mocked my work, my friends, my roots, thinking she'd outgrown me. Now I'd remind her, the man she burned wasn't her stepping stone. He was the whole damn mountain. I closed the laptop, the screen going dark. Tomorrow, I'd meet Alara, start laying the groundwork to expose this mess. But tonight, I just sat there, letting the past settle around me like dust. 12 years with a woman who'd never really known me. 12 years of bending, shrinking, trying to fit her frame. That was over. The lie she married was dead. The real me? He was just getting started. I woke up to the soft hum of the penthouse air conditioning, the city still asleep outside my windows. My phone was silent. No buzzing, no texts from Brielle, just a quiet that felt like victory. I'd gone dark last night, turned off notifications, let her stew in the mess she'd made. She was in Santorini by now, probably waking up to declined cards and a boyfriend who couldn't cover the tab. I pictured her tapping her foot, flipping her hair, demanding answers from a hotel clerk who didn't care. Good. Let her feel it. I rolled out of bed, my bare feet hitting the cool hardwood, and made coffee, strong, black, no fuss. The penthouse smelled like freedom, and I was ready to use it. First thing, I called Juno. Status? I asked, sipping from my mug. She didn't waste words. Joint accounts are locked. Cards canceled. She's got whatever cash she took with her, and that's it. Offshore trusts are set. Your $2 billion's safe. She can't touch a dime. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. The house. Juno's voice sharpened. Deeds off your name. Transferred to the LLC. She's got no claim unless she fights it in court, And with what money? I smirked. The mansion, our big, shiny suburban cage, was mine in every way that mattered. Brielle could bang on the door all she wanted. She wasn't getting in. I'd gone ghost, and it felt good. No calls, no explanations, just me pulling levers she didn't even know existed. I checked my new bank app, clean, separate accounts, fat with the sale money. Theo had wired his cut too, but mine was the lion's share. $2 billion, sitting there like a loaded gun. Brielle thought she'd left me broke, scrambling. She didn't know I'd been planning for years quiet moves, shell companies, trust she'd never sniffed out. I wasn't the fool she'd painted me as. Next, I texted Isla. How's it going? She replied fast. Noah's freaking out. Firm's on his ass. I'm good, thanks. I liked her more every day. She'd taken her own hit but wasn't crumbling. She'd sent his boss the texts, the receipts, everything, and now Noah was feeling the heat. His cushy job was probably toast by now. Cheating on your fiancé with a married woman doesn't look great on a resume. I typed back, stay sharp. She'll be home soon. Isla sent a fist bump emoji. We were a team now, whether she realized it or not. I paced the penthouse, coffee in hand, thinking about my next move. The kids were with the nanny, safe, fed, probably asking where I was. I'd call later, keep it light, but I needed to focus today. Brielle's world was collapsing, and I was the architect. I pulled up the house cam footage again, watching her burn my passport on loop. That smirk, that laugh, it fueled me. She thought she'd grounded me, but I was already flying. My phone pinged an email from Juno. House codes changed. She's locked out when she lands. Perfect. I imagined her rolling up in a cab, designer bags in tow, punching the old code into the keypad. Nothing. She'd scream, call me, maybe even the cops. Let her try. The LLC owned it now, and I had every right to secure my property. She'd be stuck outside in those stupid heels, looking like the fool she was. I needed to hit harder, though, not just money, not just the house. I wanted her exposed, her perfect little life peeled back for everyone to see. That's when I thought of Alara. She was a journalist I'd met years ago, back when my startup was just a blip. I tipped her off to a tech story once, saved her deadline. She owed me. I grabbed my laptop, shot her a message. Hey, got something big. Suburban influencer, double life, money, betrayal, the works. Coffee today? Off record for now. She replied in minutes, hell yes. 2 p.m., usual spot. I grinned. Alara loved a juicy scoop, and this was a banquet. I spent the morning digging deeper, cross-checking the receipts Isla sent, matching them to the cam footage. Every move Brielle and Noah made was sloppy, traceable. They'd used my card for everything: flights, hotels, even a damn couples massage. I saved it all, built the file thicker. Juno would use it for the legal side, but Alara? She'd turn it into a story that'd torch Brielle's precious image. All those followers, those brand deals, she'd lose them overnight. By noon, I was restless. I grabbed my keys, headed to the coffee shop early. The place was quiet, just a few people tapping away on laptops. I took a corner table, ordered a black coffee, and waited. Alara showed up right on time, her dark hair pulled back, her notebook already out. You look different, she said, sliding into the seat across from me. Good different. I shrugged. New chapter. You ready for this? She leaned in, eyes bright. Spill. I kept it vague, no names yet, just the bones. A suburban wife, an affair, a husband she thought she'd ruined. She burned my passport to keep me home while she ran off with him. I said, thinks I'm broke. I'm not. Alara's pen flew across the page. And the twist. I leaned back, sipping my coffee. I just sold my company. $2 billion. She doesn't know. Alara whistled low. That's a hell of a hook. What's the play? I told her I wanted a feature, not about me, not yet, but about the quiet financial abuses, the fake lives people like Brielle lived. She's the centerpiece, I said. Her and her lover. Let the world see. Alara nodded, scribbling. I can run it anonymous for now, sources say, that vibe. When you're ready, we name names. I agreed. Timing was everything. Brielle would be back soon, and I wanted this prime to drop when she least expected it. We hashed out details, how she'd frame it, what I'd send her next. By the time I left, the plan was solid. Back at the penthouse, I checked my phone. Brielle again. This is insane. Answer me. I didn't. Ghost protocol was in full effect. She'd land tomorrow, find the house locked, the money gone, Noah's life imploding. I'd be here, silent, untouchable, pulling strings. She'd burned my passport to trap me. I'd burned her world to set myself free. I stood by the penthouse window, coffee in hand, watching the city wake up below me. It was 3 days since Brielle had left for Santorini, and today she'd land back home, right into the trap I'd set. My phone had been quiet all morning. No texts, no calls, just the calm before the storm. Juno had confirmed everything. The house codes were changed, the accounts frozen, the LLC in place. Brielle was walking into a brick wall, and I wasn't there to soften the blow. I didn't feel guilty, not after the passport, not after the texts, not after seeing her laugh with Noah on those cams. She'd made her bed. Now she could sleep in it. I checked the flight tracker on my laptop. Her plane was due in at noon. I pictured her strutting through the airport, designer sunglasses on, expecting to come home to her perfect life. Instead, she'd find a locked door and a bank account that didn't answer her prayers. Noah was probably with her, sweating through his excuses, his own world crumbling after Isla's moves. I smirked, sipping my coffee. They deserved each other, two liars scrambling in the wreckage. I wasn't at the house, of course. I'd been watching the cams remotely, the app open on my phone. The nanny had taken the kids to her place last night. My instructions, no questions asked. I'd call them later, tell them I was on a work trip. Keep it simple. They didn't need to see this part. The footage from this morning showed an empty driveway, the mansion sitting there like a ghost town. I waited, knowing she'd show up soon, knowing the cameras would catch it all. Around 1 p.m., my phone pinged, a motion alert from the front door cam. There she was. Brielle, rolling up in a cab, her hair a little messy, her face tight with irritation. She dragged her suitcase to the keypad, punched in the old code. Nothing. She tried again, harder, then slammed her fist on the door. I turned up the volume, heard her yell, "What the hell?" She pulled out her phone, probably calling me, but I'd blocked her number last night. No point in listening to her scream. She paced the porch, her heels clicking, then tried the back door. Locked. She kicked it, swore loud enough for the mic to pick up, and sat on the steps, head in her hands. I leaned back on the couch, watching her unravel. She looked smaller out there, less like the queen she played online and more like a kid who'd lost her toy. Her suitcase sat beside her, a bright pink monstrosity stuffed with clothes she couldn't afford anymore. I didn't feel bad. She'd burned my passport, mocked me, run off with Noah thinking she'd won. This was her wake-up call, cold, hard, and overdue. My phone buzzed. Juno. "She's at the house," she said. "Cops might get called if she keeps banging around. You good with that?" I nodded to myself. "Yeah, let her try. It's my property now. She's got no leg to stand on." Juno chuckled. "She's gonna hate you for this." I shrugged, even though she couldn't see. She hated me anyway. This just makes it official. While Brielle stewed outside, I had work to do. I'd been thinking about my mom lately, how she'd raised me and Kai alone after Dad split, how she'd always said I'd do something big. She died 5 years ago, cancer, and I'd wanted to start a foundation in her name ever since. Brielle had shot it down every time, said it wasn't glamorous enough, that I should focus on real investments like her influencer friends did. Screw that. Now, with the sale money, I could do it right. I called Theo. "Hey, you still got that nonprofit guy's number?" He did. "Sending it now. What's this about?" I told him Mom's foundation, education grants, tech for kids like I'd been. He got quiet, then said, "She'd love that, man. I'm in, whatever you need." I spent the afternoon on the phone with the nonprofit guy, a sharp dude named Marcus. We hashed out a plan, $5 million to start, scholarships, coding camps, all in Mom's name. It felt good, like I was building something that mattered, not just for me but for her. Brielle never got that, legacy over likes. By the time I hung up, the papers were in motion. I'd sign tomorrow. Back on the cams, Brielle was gone. The cab must have come back. She'd probably checked into a hotel, burning through whatever cash she had left. I didn't care where she went, as long as it wasn't my problem. I poured a whiskey, sat down, and wrote her a letter. Not an email, not a text, old school, pen on paper. I kept it short. "You burned my passport to take a man on my dream trip. So I burned the illusion you called a marriage. I won't stop you from chasing fantasies. But you'll do it without me, and without the empire I built." I sealed it, addressed it to the house. The mail guy would drop it tomorrow. She'd find it eventually, whenever she figured out how to get back in. I leaned back, sipping the whiskey, letting the burn settle in my chest. The penthouse was quiet, but it didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like mine. The kids would be okay. I'd see them soon, take them somewhere fun, away from this mess. Brielle? She'd landed back in reality, and it wasn't the soft landing she'd expected. The cams had caught her meltdown, another piece for Juno's file, but I didn't need to watch it again. I'd seen enough. The clock hit 8 p.m. I stood, stretched, and walked to the window. The city glowed, alive and moving, while Brielle's world shrank. She'd thought she could burn me out of her life, leave me stuck while she danced off with Noah. But I wasn't stuck. I was free, freer than I'd been in years. The foundation was my start, a piece of something real. She'd get the letter, read the words, and no, this wasn't her game anymore. It was mine, and I was just warming up. I woke up to the sound of rain tapping against the penthouse windows, a steady drum that matched the rhythm of my thoughts. It was day 4 since Brielle's world started cracking, and I could feel the shift in the air, like the storm outside was washing away the last of her illusions. I made coffee, the machine hissing as I checked my phone. No calls from her, not since I'd blocked her, but the internet was buzzing. She'd posted late last night on her precious social media, some vague, dramatic caption, going through something real, but coming back stronger. I snorted into my mug. Typical Brielle, spinning her mess into a sob story, fishing for likes and sympathy. She didn't know the half of what was coming. I pulled up the house cams from yesterday's footage, her pacing the porch, yelling into her phone, then slumping off with her suitcase. She'd probably crashed at a hotel, maybe Noah's place if he'd made it back too. Didn't matter. She was scrambling, and I was steady. Juno had texted. She tried a lawyer. Some cheap guy. He's got nothing, prenup's ironclad. I grinned. That prenup, she'd laughed when we signed it, said it was pointless because I'd never amount to much. Now it was her cage, locking her out of my billions. The rain picked up, streaking the glass as I sat at the desk, laptop open. Alara's article had gone live an hour ago, behind the facade, when influence becomes control, and it was already spreading. She'd kept it anonymous like I'd asked, no names yet, just a suburban influencer who'd manipulated her husband's finances while living a double life with a lover. The details were vague but sharp. Enough to make people whisper, to make Brielle's followers squint at her latest post and wonder. I scrolled X, watching the chatter build. Sounds like someone I know, one user wrote. These fake perfect wives are the worst, said another. I didn't reply, didn't need to. The seed was planted. My phone buzzed. Alara. It's hitting. Comments are wild. You good? I typed back. Perfect. Let it cook. She sent a fire emoji. I leaned back, sipping my coffee, feeling the warmth spread. Brielle's whole game was her image. Those curated photos, they blessed captions, the brand deals that paid for her highlights and handbags. Now it was crumbling, and she didn't even know why yet. Her followers weren't buying the pity play. Too many had seen the article. Too many were connecting dots. I thought about her out there, probably refreshing her phone, watching the likes slow down. She'd call it a glitch, blame the algorithm, but the truth was colder. People smelled the lie. Her friends, those shallow influencer types she'd collected, were already pulling back. I'd seen it on her account. Fewer comments from the usual crew, no hard eyes from the yoga mom squad. Brands would be next. They'd drop her quietly, no emails, just a slow fade. She'd built her castle on sand, and the tide was coming in. An email popped up, anonymous, no name, just a throwaway address. She used to mock you, it read. Called you her little money tree. Said you'd never leave because you had no spine. Glad you proved her wrong. I stared at it, my jaw tight. One of her cronies, maybe, or someone she'd vented to at a wine night. Didn't matter who. It confirmed what I'd suspected. She'd never respected me, just used me as her prop. I saved it, forwarded it to Juno. Another brick in the wall. The rain kept falling, a gray curtain over the city. I stood, stretching, and walked to the window. Brielle was in damage control mode, but she had no tools left. No money, no house, no husband to lean on. Noah was useless too. Isla had gutted his career, and he'd be lucky to keep a job flipping burgers. I pictured them holed up somewhere, arguing over whose fault it was, their grand plan in ashes. She'd burned my passport to keep me down, but all she'd done was light her own fuse. I checked the cams again. Nothing new, just the empty house, rain pooling in the driveway. She hadn't come back yet, probably licking her wounds somewhere. I didn't care. My focus was shifting, less on her, more on me. The foundation papers were ready. I'd sign them tomorrow with Marcus. $5 million to start, a real legacy, not some filtered photo. Op Mom would have loved it. Brielle never did. She'd called it a waste, said I should buy a yacht instead. Funny how she'd chased Flash while I built substance. My phone pinged again, a text from Theo. Article's a hit. You sure you don't want your name out there? Hero vibes. I laughed, typed back. Not yet. Let her burn first. He sent a thumbs up. Theo got it. He'd seen Brielle's snide comments over the years, watched her try to shrink me. Now he was cheering me on, and it felt good to have him in my corner. I sat back down, pulling up her social media again. The post was still up, but the comments were turning. What's real, huh? Spill the tea, one said. This why your grid's been quiet? Another jabbed. I didn't smile, too much anger for that, but I felt the shift. She'd thrived on control, on everyone buying her act. Now the mask was slipping, and she couldn't glue it back on. The anonymous email stuck with me. Little money tree. That's what she'd seen me as, something to shake for cash, then toss when the leaves dried up. She didn't know I'd grown roots deeper than she could reach, that I'd turned that tree into a forest. $2 billion, a new life, a chance to be me again. She'd mocked my work ethic, my quiet nights coding while she partied. Now that work had uprooted her whole game. I poured a whiskey, the rain a steady beat outside. The article was just the start. Alara had more coming when I gave the word. Brielle's burn notice was live, and the fire was spreading. She'd wake up tomorrow to fewer followers, colder friends, a life she couldn't fake her way out of. I wasn't gloating, not yet. This wasn't about joy. It was about justice. She tried to burn me out of her story. Now I was writing the ending, and it wasn't hers to control. I stood in the penthouse kitchen, the morning light cutting through the rain clouds that had finally cleared. The coffee machine gurgled as I waited, my mind on the meeting ahead. Brielle had texted last night. Not from her number, probably a friend's phone since I'd blocked her. We need to talk. Public place. Please. I'd stared at it for 10 minutes before replying. Fine. Noon. The diner on 5th. I didn't want to see her, didn't want to hear her voice, but I needed to look her in the eye one last time. See if she'd squirm, lie, or finally break. The diner was neutral ground, busy enough that she couldn't make a scene. I'd hear her out, then walk away for good. The clock hit 11:30, and I grabbed my jacket, plain, black, nothing she'd picked. The drive was short, the city humming around me as I pulled into the diner's lot. She was already there, sitting in a booth by the window, her hair pulled back, her face bare of the usual makeup. She looked tired, smaller somehow, like the fight had drained out of her. I slid into the seat across from her, keeping my expression blank. The waitress came by, and I ordered coffee black, no sugar. Brielle fidgeted with her water glass, her nails chipped, no polish. That was new. You're being cruel, she started, her voice low but sharp. Locking me out, freezing everything, it's too much. You've made your point. I leaned back, sipping my coffee, letting her words hang there. She expected me to jump in, apologize, fix it. I didn't. No, I said finally, setting the mug down. This isn't revenge. This is release. I'm not punishing you, Brielle. I'm removing you from the center of my story. Her eyes narrowed, then widened, like she couldn't decide if I was serious. Your story? She snapped. What about ours? The kids, the house. You burned that. I cut in, my voice steady. The second you torched my passport and ran off with Noah. You don't get to play wife now. She flinched, her hands tightening on the glass. It wasn't like that, she said, but her tone was weak, rehearsed. I just needed a break. You were always working, always gone. I laughed, a short, bitter sound that stopped her cold. A break? You planned it for months. Stole from me. Mocked me. Don't lie to my face. She shifted, her eyes darting to the table, then back up. Okay, fine. I messed up. But you can't just erase me. We've got history. History. 12 years of me bending, building, while she posed and preened. I leaned forward, keeping my voice low. History's why I'm here. I gave you everything: time, money, a life. You threw it back at me. Now you're out of moves. Her lips parted, then closed. She tried a new tack, softening her voice, tilting her head like she used to when she wanted something. We can fix this. For the kids. I'll come home. We'll work it out, Al. No, I said, sharper this time. You don't get it. There's no home for you to come back to. It's mine, the house, the money, the life I built. You're not part of it anymore. Her face hardened, the mask slipping. You think you're some big shot now? You'll crash without me. You always needed me to. I held up a hand, stopping her. I needed you to what? Dress me up? Tell me who to be? I'm done with that. And you're done with me. She tried threats next, her voice rising. I'll fight this. Lawyers, courts, I'll take half. I pulled the prenup from my jacket, slid it across the table. She'd signed it years ago, laughing, thinking it was a joke. Read it, I said. You get nothing. Not a dime. Her eyes scanned the page, her breath hitching. This can't. There's no way. I stood, tossing a few bills for the coffee. Turns out poor husbands do pretty well when they play the long game. Goodbye, Brielle. I walked out, her stare burning into my back, but I didn't turn. The air outside was crisp, the city alive around me. She'd tried everything: guilt, charm, threats, and none of it stuck. I got in my car, let out a long breath. That was it, the last thread cut. She wasn't my wife anymore, not in any way that mattered. The diner faded in my rear view as I drove back to the penthouse, the weight lifting off my chest. Back home, I poured a whiskey, the afternoon sun slanting through the windows. The prenup was my shield, but the Real wind was walking away. She'd thought she could manipulate me one last time, pull me back into her orbit. She didn't know I'd outgrown her. My phone buzzed. Alara. Articles still trending. Push the names? I typed back. Soon. Let it simmer. Brielle's meltdown at the diner would have been gold for the story, but I didn't need it. The anonymous version was enough for now. I thought about her sitting there, grasping at straws. She'd called me cruel, but cruelty would have been dragging this out, playing her game. I'd ended it clean. The kids were next. I'd see them tomorrow, take them for ice cream, start rebuilding what she'd cracked. They didn't need her drama, just me being there. I'd figure out custody with Juno, keep it smooth. The whiskey burned going down, a good burn. I wasn't the man she'd married, the quiet coder she could shape. I was me again, raw and real, with $2 billion and a life she couldn't touch. She'd unmasked herself today, shown the desperation behind the polish. I'd unmasked her too, stripped her of the power she'd held over me. The match was over. I'd won. And I wasn't looking back. I woke up to sunlight spilling across the penthouse floor, the city stretching out beyond the glass like a promise I could finally keep. Brielle was gone, not just from the house, but from my head, her voice fading after yesterday's diner showdown. I'd cut the last tie, left her grasping at air, and now the day was mine. Coffee brewed in the kitchen, the rich smell filling the space as I pulled on a plain t-shirt and jeans, clothes I liked, not ones she'd approved. My phone buzzed. Marcus, the nonprofit guy. Papers ready. Meet at 10. I typed back. See you there. Today was about building, not breaking. I drove to his office downtown, the streets busy with morning traffic. The foundation was real now, Mom's name on it. $5 million to start, a chance to give kids like I'd been a shot at something big. Marcus greeted me with a handshake, his desk piled with forms. This is solid, he said, sliding the papers over. Scholarships, coding camps, mentorships, starts next quarter. I signed, my pen scratching across the page, feeling her with me, Mom, who'd worked double shifts to buy me that first clunky computer. Brielle had called this a waste. She was wrong. This was legacy. Back in the car, I called the nanny. Bring the kids to the park at noon, I said. I'll meet you there. She agreed, no questions. I hadn't seen them since I'd left, and the ache hit hard, my son's goofy grin, my daughter's quiet questions. I'd kept it light on the phone, said I was working, but they deserved more. The park was neutral, open, a place to start fresh. I stopped for ice cream on the way, chocolate for him, strawberry for her, guessing their favorites like I hadn't been gone. They ran to me when I got there, small arms wrapping around my legs. Daddy, my son yelled, his face smeared with dirt already. My daughter hugged quieter, her eyes searching mine. Where were you? She asked. I crouched down, handed them the cones. Work stuff, kiddo. But I'm here now. How's it been? They chattered, school, the nanny's pancakes, a lizard they'd seen. I listened, really listened, no phone in my hand, no Brielle nagging in the background. We sat on a bench, the sun warm, and I told them we'd take a trip soon. Where? My son asked, ice cream dripping. Florence, I said. Italy. Cool buildings, good food. They grinned, no clue it was my dream too, one Brielle had mocked. The nanny watched from a distance, giving us space. I'd sort custody later, Juno was on it. But for now, this was enough. They didn't ask about their mom, and I didn't bring her up. She'd call them eventually, spin her story, but I wouldn't poison them against her. They'd see the truth someday. We played tag, me chasing them through the grass, laughing like I hadn't in years. My lungs burned, but it felt good, alive, free. Later, I dropped them back with the nanny and drove to the university. I'd guest lectured there before, back when the startup was small. The dean had emailed last week, asking me to come again. I walked into the lecture hall, kids in hoodies staring up, some half asleep. I'm not here to bore you, I started, leaning on the podium. I'm here to tell you what I wish I'd known. I talked code, grit, how I built something from a garage. They perked up when I mentioned the sale, $2 billion, a number that made their eyes widen. Money's nice, I said, but it's what you do with it that counts. I told them about the foundation, saw a few nod. One kid asked, what's the catch? I grinned. No catch. Just work hard and don't let anyone tell you you're small. Driving back, I called Kai, my brother. We drifted, Brielle's doing, mostly, saying he was too rough for her crowd. Hey, man, I said when he picked up. Been too long. He laughed, deep and warm. No kidding. You okay? Heard some crap about Brielle. I told him short version, no drama. Damn, he said. You're a badass now. Trip soon? Me. You, the kids. I smiled. Florence. You're in. He hooped. Hell yeah. Next was Silas, my best friend from college. Brielle had hated him, called him a slacker because he didn't dress the part. Yo, he answered, voice sleepy. You alive? I laughed. More than ever. Florence, me and Kai. You. He groaned, then chuckled. Twist my arm. I'm there. We'd rebuild, me, Kai, Silas, the kids. No filters, no fakes. Back at the penthouse, I sat at the desk, laptop open. The platform I'd been coding secret, personal, needed finishing. I called it Vero Truth, Authenticity, a space for real voices, not posed perfection. Brielle's world was likes and lies. This was the opposite. I typed, lines flowing, the old coder in me waking up. Hours passed, the sun dipping low, and I leaned back, satisfied. It wasn't done, but it was alive. I poured a whiskey, stepped onto the balcony. Florence waited, my trip, my way, no approval needed. The kids' laughter echoed in my head, Kai's voice, Silas's grin. The foundation was rolling, the lecture had landed, Vera was breathing. Brielle was out there somewhere, scrambling, but she didn't own me anymore. I'd shifted, money, sure, but more than that. Freedom, purpose. Me again, not her version. The city glowed below, a canvas I could paint on now. 2 billion open doors, but this family, work, truth was the key. I sipped the whiskey, the breeze cool on my face. Legacy mode wasn't about winning against her. It was about building beyond her. And I was just getting started. I stood on the stage in Lisbon, the tech conference buzzing around me, a sea of faces staring up from the crowd. The lights were hot, the mic heavy in my hand, but I felt steady, steadier than I'd been in years. It was a year since Brielle burned my passport, a year since I'd walked out and turned her world upside down. Now I was here, unveiling Vero, my platform, my truth to a room full of coders, investors, and dreamers. The screen behind me glowed with the logo, simple, bold, real. Authenticity, I said, my voice carrying over the hum. Accountability. Truth. That's what this is about. The crowd leaned in, phones up, recording. I wasn't nervous. This was me, raw and ready. I'd spent months coding Vero, nights on the penthouse balcony with my laptop, the city lights my only company. It wasn't just an app. It was a middle finger to the fake lives Brielle thrived on, a space where people could build without posing. I walked them through it, open source roots, encrypted chats, no algorithms pushing lies. We've got enough filters, I said. This strips them away. They clapped, a ripple at first, then a wave. I saw Kai in the front row, grinning, Silas beside him giving a thumbs up. The kids were with the nanny back home, but I'd bring them here someday, show them what their dad could do. After the demo, I stepped off stage, the Q&A looming. Reporters swarmed, mics in my face. 2 billion from your startup, true? One asked. I nodded. Yeah. Sold it last year. Another jumped in. Rumors say your wife betrayed you. That why you built this? I paused, the question hanging there. Brielle's shadow still followed me, even here. I smiled, kept it light. She gave me clarity. That's worth more than anything she took. They scribbled, nodded, moved on. I didn't name her, not yet. Alara's article had done its job, and Brielle's name was mud online anyway. I didn't need to twist the knife. The crowd thinned, and I grabbed a water, my throat dry from talking. Kai slapped my back. Killed it, man. Mom'd be proud. I grinned. Yeah, she would. Silas chimed in. Drinks later. You're buying, billionaire. I laughed, the sound easy. Florence had been a blast. Me, Kai, Silas, the kids, eating gelato by the Arno. No schedules, no filters. Now Lisbon was ours, a victory lap I'd earned. A woman approached, dark hair, sharp eyes. Not a reporter, something else. Great talk, she said, her voice warm but direct. I'm Noah. Artist, entrepreneur. Vero's got legs, real ones. I liked her already. No fluff, no games. Thanks, I said. What's your angle? She smiled, a spark there. Building something too. Smaller scale, but same vibe, truth over trash. We talked. Her project, mine, the mess of tech these days. She didn't ask about money, didn't fish for status. Just ideas, straight up. Rebuilding's hard, I said, testing her. She nodded. So am I. I grinned. Me too. We swapped numbers, nothing forced, just a thread to pull later. She walked off, and I watched her go, feeling something shift. Not love, not yet, just possibility. Brielle had been flash and control. Noah felt like fire and grit. I didn't need a partner, but I wasn't closed off either. The right side of history wasn't about being alone. It was about being real. Back at the hotel, I sat on the balcony, Lisbon's lights sprawling below. The conference buzzed online, Vero trending, my name tied to it. Visionary, they called me. Comeback king. I didn't care about the labels. The sale, the money, it was fuel, not the fire. The fire was this, the foundation thriving, kids in coding camps because of mom's name, my own kids laughing again, asking about Italy, Kai and Silas back in my life, Vero breathing, growing. Brielle? She was a footnote now, divorce final, her accounts dry, her followers gone. She tried to come back post months ago, got ratioed to hell. I didn't check anymore. I thought about that night, the passport in ashes, her smirk, my quiet exit. She'd thought she'd won, thought I'd stay small. But I'd burned bigger, burned the lies she'd built around me, the cage she'd locked me in. 2 billion open doors, but walking out saved me. I'd rebuilt, not for revenge, but for me. The kids had a dad again, not a prop. I had brothers, Kai, Silas, not her fake friends. And now, maybe, Noah, a spark, not a script. My phone buzzed, Theo. Launch is a hit. Investors calling. You're back, man. I typed. Never left. Just found the right side. He sent a fist bump. I leaned back, the night air cool. Lisbon glowed, a city I'd conquered, but the Real wind was quieter. Me here, whole. Brielle's fire hadn't destroyed me. It had cleared the way, torched the junk I didn't need. I'd lost a wife, a house, a version of myself I'd hated. I'd gained everything else. I stood, stretching, the conference noise fading below. Vero was out there now, my mark on the world. The foundation was growing, the kids were mine, and Noah's number sat in my phone, a maybe, a what if. I didn't need to prove anything to Brielle anymore. She'd lost the game she'd started. I was on the right side, not of money or fame, but of me. The man I'd always been, under her noise. The one she'd never seen coming. I walked inside, the balcony door clicking shut. Tomorrow, I'd fly home, kids, Kai, Silas, a life I'd built. Some fires don't end you. They start you. And I was burning bright.